Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that these nationwide injunctions go well beyond the authority of the courts. It is a massive, massive victory for the Trump administration and for the Trump administration's agenda. Doesn't mean the nationwide injunctions are invalid. It means that they apply only to that particular district and not to the whole country. So Donald Trump can proceed with his MAGA agenda as the underlying case will ultimately get resolved by the Supreme Court. This case had to do with the 14th Amendment, but the Supreme Court didn't rule on the merits of Donald Trump's argument, which is that the 14th Amendment does not apply to illegal aliens who are in the country who have children. That will ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court in October, and it's a coin toss as to whether or not Trump will win on the merits of that case. My opinion is that the interpretation of the 14th Amendment is such that if you are in the country illegally, you cannot have a child on American soil and have that child automatically be deemed a citizen. But I suspect other members of the Supreme Court will feel very differently. Of course, the liberals will. Here's what President Trump said today about the decision on the injunctions, number 20.
Well, I think taking power away from these absolutely crazy radical left judges is a tremendous. This is such a big day. This is such a big day. It's like it's sort of sad because we're doing the signing at 3 o'clock, and this may very well dominate the signing of a big war that was going on and really affecting the continent of think of it, the entire continent of Africa was being affected, and we're settling that war today, and this will probably be a headline. But this is a very big moment, and it gives power back to people that should have it, including Congress, including the presidency. And it only takes bad power away from judges. It really doesn't take power. It takes bad power, sick power, and unfair power. And it's really going to be, this is a very monumental decision. Yeah.
Again, 6-3 decision, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote the majority decision, which is unusual. Normally, Roberts writes the decisions of major cases like this. But he assigned the case to her, and she wrote the decision, joined by Thomas Alito Gorsuch Kavanaugh. Dissents were written by Sonia Sotomayor, joining her Justices Kagan and Jackson. And the court said, quote, "The issue raised by these applications, whether Congress has granted federal courts authority to universally enjoin the enforcement of an executive order, plainly warrants this court's review. The government is likely to succeed on the merits of this claim that the district courts lack authority to issue universal injunctions." By the way, these injunctions were not issued for the first 200 years of our nation's history. It really started in the early 2000s and were used to thwart the agenda of George W. Bush. And of course, it's been put on steroids under Donald Trump because he's done so much. The ruling continued, "The issuance of a universal injunction can be justified only as an exercise of equitable authority, yet Congress has granted federal courts no such power. The Judiciary Act of 1789 endowed federal courts with jurisdiction over all suits in equity, and still today, this statute is what authorizes the federal court to issue equitable remedies. This court has held that the statutory grant encompasses only those sorts of equitable remedies traditionally accorded by the courts of equity at our country's inception." Close quote. In English, that means for 200 years, we've not allowed these nationwide injunctions to prevent a president from enacting his agenda, and we're not going to start now. Here's more of the president, number 26.
An amazing decision, one that we're very happy about. This morning, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law in striking down the excessive use of nationwide injunctions to interfere with the normal functioning of the executive branch. The Supreme Court has stopped the presidency itself. That's what they've done. And really, it's been an amazing period of time this last hour. There are people elated all over the country. I've seen such happiness and spirit. Sometimes you don't see that, but this case is very important. I was elected on a historic mandate, but in recent months we've seen a handful of radical left judges effectively tried to overrule the rightful powers of the president to stop the American people from getting the policies that they voted for in record numbers. It was a grave threat to democracy, frankly, and instead of merely ruling on the immediate cases before them, these judges have attempted to dictate the law for the entire nation. In practice, this meant that if any one of the nearly 700 federal judges disagreed with the policy of a duly elected president of the United States, he or she could block that policy from going into effect or at least delay it for many years, tie it up in the court system. This was a colossal abuse of power which never occurred in American history prior to recent decades, and we've been hit with more nationwide injunctions than were issued in the entire 20th century together. Think of it, more than the entire 20th century, me. I'm grateful to the Supreme Court for stepping in and solving this very, very big and complex problem, and they've made it very simple. I want to thank Justice Barrett, who wrote the opinion brilliantly, as well as Chief Justice Roberts, and Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas. Great people. Thanks for this decision, and thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country on a vacation. This was, in fact, it was the same date, the exact same date, the end of the Civil War. It was meant for the babies of slaves, and it's so clean and so obvious. But this lets us go there and finally win that case, because hundreds of thousands of people are pouring into our country under birthright citizenship, and it wasn't meant for that reason. It was meant for the babies of slaves. So thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with these numerous policies, and those that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis, including birthright citizenship, ending sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping federal taxpayers from paying for transgender surgeries, and numerous other priorities of the American people. We have so many of them. I have a whole list. I'm not going to bore you.
Now, the injunctions that have been leveled against the president still apply to those particular jurisdictions, but they don't apply to the nation. So we're going to have different courts ruling different things, and what will happen is those who are trying to thwart the Trump's agenda will go to liberal courts, liberal justices, and file suits, but they won't enjoin the entire policy for the whole country. By the way, Biden made the same argument about nationwide injunctions when a local judge ruled against a so-called abortion pill, made exactly the same arguments that President Trump made. So this is going to benefit both Democrats and Republicans down the road. Even law experts on CNN call this a massive, massive victory for the Trump agenda.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.